Hey, welcome back to another episode of Morg's Brew, and today we're going to be talking about the pineapple beer we made last week. So stick around for the next 5 minutes while I go over the do's and don'ts for you guys so you don't mess up your first brew. Tastes like it's got a little bit of wine in it. It's fizzy, it's cold, it's refreshing. Pineapple-y for sure, not too sweet at all. I can definitely taste the alcohol. Last night I felt the alcohol. Yeah, definitely a good home brew. And when you make a pineapple beer, you're going to have 2 stages of fermentation. You're going to have the first stage of fermentation where everything's sitting in the bucket or the vessel with all the fruit and the yeast, and it's busy eating up all that sugar and pooing out some alcohols, doing the things that we want it to do. And then you have the second stage of fermentation, and that's going to be when you've filtered and bottled your brew and it's sitting on the counter, carbonating and fermenting further. We're going to break this down in 2 parts. We're going to separate the first stage from the second stage, and we're going to go over everything you need to know to get you through this without any problems. When you're out there choosing your fermentation vessels, I use plastic, you can use stainless steel, but don't use aluminium. It all starts in stage 1, where you've got to put all your stuff in the big fermentation vessel. Be wise and sterilize. You're going to leave all the sugary stuff in a bucket for a week. You never know what could go on there. So just make sure this first step is done properly, and then the rest you just get to sit back, relax, and wait for the yeast to poo. For your sterilizing solutions, you're going to use just a concentrated bleach. Now you must go and look at your specific concentration of sodium hypochlorite in your bleach solution. Make sure it's got no scents or fragrance or other things in here, just pure bleach. You use that at about a 1% concentration. I'll put a formula in the description below so you can work out how to get there. All you're going to do is rinse it with a 1%. Discard that and start straight away. You don't need to rinse the bleach solution off of your brewing vessels. Just when you stir your brews, it's going to be enough to dislodge and aerate that so that chlorine gets out of the solution. Now there's going to be a lot of different recipes out there for this. Basically what you're trying to do is you're trying to ferment the sugars using a living organism, which is yeast in our case. It could be brewer's yeast or instant yeast. It's just going to make a difference in your potential endpoint concentration. But they both require a bit of air to start. So when you add these, you don't need to pre-mix them in some warm water. They're going to hydrate. They've got a week to mix up in that brew of yours. But just give them a nice rooting in there when you mix them in. Get some air into that solution, avoiding any further contamination. If you use instant yeast, you're not going to get above 10%. And if you use brewer's yeast, you're not going to get above 15%. Either way, you shouldn't be playing around at the upper levels of yeast unless you know a few things about potential contaminations. You don't want to end up with methanol poisoning. You're going to go blind if you drink too much methanol. So rather don't leave this to get to that end point. Don't boil your yeast. What you're trying to do is get yeast to turn these sugars into alcohol for you. And you're trying to do it using a specific set of yeast, a specific group of yeast, and not the wild one. If you're really short and you can't find any yeast, you can make your own. There are natural yeasts on the skins of fruits. Grapes, apples, raisins, pineapples all have natural yeasts on them. So by doing a basic wash and then skipping the boiling step, adding the sugar, you're going to get those natural yeasts that are going to take that process on. But the problem is you don't know what else is in there. So that's why I'm recommending you boil your stuff first until you've got this down, and then you up your game. Add in little bits of extra to give them some more geus. Put in some raisins, a bit of molasses, and it gives that yeast a bit more vigor in its system. You can add tea to it to add some bitter, add some tannins in that mix, and it'll change the flavor. Gingers and lime can also be included. The smaller you chop your fruit up, the more surface area it has in contact with the water around it. So chop them up into small enough pieces that you can still filter out at the end. More yeast does not mean more alcohol. More sugar does mean more alcohol. Too much sugar means no alcohol. So there's a balance there around 14%. That's what you're aiming for. Where all your ingredients are sitting inside your fermentation vessel, which we used 20-liter bucket like this. The reason we use something like this is because it's easy to seal. It was very easy to attach this. And the benefit of having a pipe like this is so that no outside air comes back into the vessel during the process of fermentation. That minimizes the risk of contamination. You won't be likely to get any wild yeasts coming in there, and you'll be able to protect your brew from invasion. 2 days is juice, 5 days is good, 7 days is strong, and more than that is dangerous. Stay away from it. Just stay away. Stay away, brew. Don't want to go blind. Don't want to go blind. When we eventually get to bottling out our pineapple beer, it's all the steps in the beginning repeated. Mix up your 1% bleach, wash out everything you're going to be using that's going to come in contact with your brew. You don't want to introduce any contaminants now. When it comes to filtering, I like to use a funnel into the vessel, and I have just a fine mesh plastic sieve that I use to capture all the big stuff. So once you've got everything bottled up and you were careful to be sterile along the way, you seal those things, and that's where you're going to have your stage 2. Stage 2 fermentation starts to happen when it's all in the bottles. And it still continues fermenting, but you don't have as much stuff in the solution for it to use. There's still sugars there, so it will continue to get to its end point. It'll continue to rise in that alcohol content. And the longer you leave it, the higher it's going to get. During the second stage of fermentation, while they're in the bottles, you have a chance of explosion. Don't let your bottles explode. And let me show you just how we do it so that it protects our bottles and our kitchens and ourselves from any kinds of dangerous explosions. So I like to keep it all stored up in a cold box like this. And I come in regularly, and you feel over here to see how tight they are. If they need to be released, you release them a bit, but if something were to happen, they're inside there, nothing else is going to get out and make a mess around the place. If you find your second stage is happening too quickly and those bottles are just crazy, while it's in the cold box, add some blocks of ice and some water just to drop that temperature, and it'll slow down the reaction. At the end of that 2 days second fermentation, you're going to take these bottles and you're going to put them into the fridge. Because by putting them in the fridge, it's going to chill that yeast right back and slow them down. Let me just test the specific gravity of my brew, and I can figure out the content, the alcohol content of it. And then we're going to head out of here. But I hope you've been able to see some of the key steps along the way. I would say consume this within 7 days, enjoy. We're almost out of this period of lockdown. Soon they're going to be allowing us to buy our booze again, but until then we're going to be brewing our own. So stick to these do's and don'ts. Don't get caught up in all the fuss, and you'll be making yourself a drinkable beer. Don't underestimate yourself, and don't be scared of it. Drink it. Okay guys, and that brings me to the end of this episode. I hope that you've learned a few things and you're a bit more confident in your own processes. If any of you guys have got any questions, stick it in the comments below and I'll get right back to you. And for all those newcomers to my channel, thanks very much for joining. Thanks for subscribing. I'm going to be doing more of these sorts of talking things where I'm trying to give you something informative with a bit of fun. You're trying to learn something at the same time as enjoying what you see. So I hope you have. I spent a bit of time trying to get this all ready for you guys so that you can brew your own beers at home. Hope you enjoy it. Hope you guys are safe and enjoy the last little bits of lockdown before we enter this phased reopening of the economy. Peace.